my name is Amy from 10thacrefarm.com, and today I'm going to talk about how to build a worm bin. Now, before you build a worm bin, it's important to know why you might want to build a worm bin. What's the purpose and what's the benefit? With worm bins, the purpose is to create worm castings. And basically, worm castings is essentially worm poop, okay? So we have a bin, we add food scraps, there are worms in there. The worms break down the food and decompose that, and they excrete that out as worm castings. Now, the benefit of worm castings is how we can use it in the garden. Worm castings are highly nutrient rich manures. We can't always add them immediately to the garden. We can with some, like such as rabbit poop can be added directly to the garden. But other types of manures, we have to be very careful about adding them directly to the garden. With worm castings, they are immediately safe, so we can immediately add them to the garden. They are immediately bioavailable to plants, which is really great. There are very few soil amendments or soil fertilizers out there that are immediately bioavailable to plants. Most of them, not all, but most of them will act more like a slow release fertilizer. The microorganisms in the soil need to break down the contents of that soil amendment first, and then it becomes bioavailable to the plants. That's not so with worm castings. The worms have already done the work of breaking down the amendment, and so it is immediately bioavailable to plants. So we've got an amendment that is high in nutrients, immediately available to plants, and there's no top limit to the number of worm castings we can add to garden soil. So with other amendments, there can be concern about adding too much of something. But with worm castings, we can add as much as we want. Now, usually in the case of worm castings, we never have as many as we want. So that's the challenge there. The third reason to use worm castings in the garden is that they immediately improve moisture regulation and moisture retention in the garden. So it helps garden soil regulate moisture levels, which is really great for your plants. When it's dry outside, the worm castings will help improve the soil's ability to retain moisture, whereas in wet environments and during the rainy season, the worm castings will help the garden soil release that moisture and not be too soggy. So worm castings are highly beneficial for the garden. It's also a really great way for people who live in small spaces such as apartments or condos, or even people who live in an HOA who really want to be able to compost their food scraps and they can't have a compost bin outside. A worm bin is an excellent solution for that as well. So even though I live now on 3 acres and I could have as many compost bins outside as I want to, I would not miss out on the chance, the opportunity to have some worm bins in my garage to compost some of my food scraps and turn it into nutrient-rich worm castings. So today I'm going to talk to you about how I like to build a worm bin. I've got my old worm bin here that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to show you how I build that by building some new ones. So let's get started. When you build a worm bin the way that I like to do it, the first thing you're going to need is 2 20-gallon totes, plastic totes. I got these at Home Depot. I probably wouldn't have started buying them so soon, but I found them on the sale rack, and they were like $3 for both of them or something crazy like that, so I just had to pick them up. Very inexpensive to buy 2 20-gallon plastic totes. The second thing you'll need to build this type of worm bin is a cordless drill. I've got my cordless drill here, and I've got 2 different sizes of drill bits. I've got the 1/4-inch drill bit, and I have the 1/8-inch drill bit. My old worm bin, I used a 1/16-inch drill bit instead of an 1/8-inch drill bit. I'm experimenting with using the 1/8-inch instead of the 16th-inch. I'm making the holes a little bit bigger, and now I hope that I remember to explain why that is when we look at the old bin. It's just an experiment. The old bin works fine. We also need shredded paper. I've got 2 different kinds of paper here. I've got shredded paper that we have a document shredder. We shred all kinds of things, not even stuff that's not security sensitive. We just shred it up because this is the type of paper that I really like to use in the worm bins. I think the worms really like it in this texture. I've also got some newspaper that we will easily just tear into strips, so that works just as well if you don't have a document shredder. You're going to need 4 bricks. You're gonna need a spray bottle of water, just plain water, and you're gonna need some food scraps. This is my compost bucket from my kitchen counter. It's got a few food scraps in it that we're gonna use today. So let's get started. The first thing we're gonna do is we're going to drill holes in the bottom of both of the totes. Okay, we're gonna take the 1/4-inch drill bit, and we're gonna drill 50 holes. So let's see, I've already got that one done. I've got to finish this one up. Using the 1/4-inch drill bit, I drilled 50 holes in the bottom of both totes. These are for aeration. They're also for worm migration from one bin to the other, and I will explain that better as we finish building the new bin and take a look at the old bin. The second thing we're going to do, and I've already done it to save you some time from watching me drill, is with both bins, I took the 1/8-inch drill bit, and I drilled holes around the lip here on both bins, all the way around. So I think there are about 60 holes. This is for aeration as well. When you've got worms that naturally grow in the ground and you're putting them in a plastic tote, you want to make sure that you're giving them enough air to breathe, okay? And plastic doesn't breathe as well as earth, so we want to make sure that they're not suffocating in there. So we've got our holes, and that's one thing that I'm experimenting with on this new bin. On the old bin, I used a 1/16-inch drill bit to drill the air holes. This time I used an 1/8-inch drill bit, and I don't know, it may be too big, like they might want to crawl out of it, but I think they might like the extra air. We'll see. The last thing I'm going to do is, now both totes came with a lid. One lid I'm just going to leave as is. I'm not going to do anything to it. But one lid I'm going to drill more aeration holes in it. So I stayed with the 1/8 inch drill bit, and I drilled about 50 or so air holes in this lid. So now I've got all of my drilling finished, and I'm ready to build this bin. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm taking one tote. Just take one tote and set it aside. You only need one bin to work with. So what you want to do is you want to divide up your shredded paper into half. You're going to put half on the bottom of this one tote. And I've got some maintenance to do on the old bin today, so I'm going to try to divide up my shredded paper between the new bin and the old bin. You can see it's about 2 to 4 inches of shredded paper in the bottom of this bin. Now what we want to do is we want to moisten it so that the paper feels like a wrung out sponge. I'm going to take my gloves off for this so that I can feel when the paper gets to the right amount of moisture. You don't want it to be soggy so that you can wring out water. You just want it to feel like it's already a wrung out sponge. So I'm going to mix this paper around, keep spraying until I feel like I've got it at the right moisture level. Just about there. Alright, that's pretty good. So, I forgot to mention when I was going over the materials list for building a worm bin, I forgot to mention that you're going to need worms. Duh. You're going to need worms. Now, the important thing is that you're not going to just go out to your garden, dig up some earthworms, and throw those in your bin. Earthworms are not very good for a compost pile or a compost bin. We won't go over why that is, but red wigglers are the type of worm that you want for the worm bin. Red wigglers you're gonna want to get from somebody you know who has a worm bin. Now, anybody who has a worm bin knows that red wiggler worms, they reproduce really fast, and so most people are trying to find homes for their worms as they reproduce, and so maybe you can find somebody in your local area who has some worms for you. They're very inexpensive to buy online. If you Google lazy way to make fertilizer on 10thacrefarm.com, you'll find my instructions for building this type of worm bin, and you'll see a link there for the type of red wigglers that I like to buy. You're going to need about 1,000 red wiggler worms for this 20-gallon tote. Sounds like a lot, but that's the amount that'll get you started. They'll actually reproduce more, so you'll have lots and lots of worms in this bin once it gets going. So I mentioned that because that's the next thing we're going to be doing to this bin. We're going to be adding the worms. Now, since I already have a worm bin, I'm going to be adding worms from the old bin in. If you bought them online, you're just going to add the worms in. If your worms are new, you may want to add like a handful or two of garden soil in with the worms. It's not required, it's not necessary. It might just make them feel a little bit more like home. The shredded paper on the bottom of this bin is called the bedding. Okay, the bedding is what gives them a place to live that isn't in food scraps or in their poop. Okay, so the worm bin has bedding, it has the worms, it has food scraps, and then it has the worm castings as they make them. So the bedding is just there to give them somewhere to live and hang out when they're not eating and pooping. Okay, so I got into my old bin and I got several handfuls of the worms out to add to this new bin. I also fished out some of the food scraps that they hadn't finished yet in there. So I'm going to throw some food scraps in with the worm bins, or I'm sorry, with the new worms. Then I'm going to add some new food scraps to it. You can see that we've got a nice healthy crop of worms here, and that's going to give us a good start to the new bin. I'm going to add just a tiny amount of food scraps from the kitchen. These are mostly tea bags. We drink a lot of tea since we work from home. Eggshells in there. Okay. That was probably maybe 2 cups of food. So whether you're starting out with a small amount of worms from an existing bin or whether you are starting out with a bundle of worms new, the important thing to note is that you don't want to feed them too much right at first. Okay, you just want to give them maybe 1 or 2 cups of food. I might have given them too much just now, but you increase the amount of food scraps you give them as they grow, as they reproduce. Okay, so for now, I'd say in the beginning, you're going to add maybe 1 or 2 cups of food each week for maybe 1 or 2 months. You're going to want to get your hand in there sometime, dig around, see how many worms you're noticing. That way you can be aware of when they start to multiply, because as they start to multiply, you're going to be able to add more food scraps each time you feed the bin. Currently, in my old bin, I can add an entire one of these each week with no problem, and they eat it right up. So after you add the food, the next thing you're going to want to do is add the second half of the bedding on top, and then again you're going to moisten it with the spray bottle of water until it feels like a wrung out sponge. Now the important thing to note is that with this bin, every time you add food, you're going to scrape the bedding that's on top to one side, add the food scraps, and then cover it back up again with the bedding. Okay, so the bedding on top will always cover the food scraps. Okay, when the food scraps are make contact with the air, they decompose faster than the worms can decompose it. The food can rot faster than the worms can decompose it, and you can have problems like fruit flies or bad smells or things like that. But the important thing to note is it's very simple. Just keep food scraps covered with the shredded paper bedding at all times. Now, this bedding on top, it's going to decompose over time. So, every so often, you're going to need to add more bedding so that there's a top layer on top of your food scraps. Let me just moisten this real quick and mix it together so that it feels like a wrung out sponge. If you want, you can do this in a bucket before you pour it into the bin. It's up to you. Okay, that's good. So, this bin is done. I'm going to take the lid with the air holes and close this bin up. This bin is done. So, you're probably wondering, actually, here's what we're going to do next. I'm going to show you how it stands. You can see how the old bin stands. What we want to do is we want to put the lid that doesn't have holes in it on the ground. We're going to put a brick in each corner. And we're going to sit this on top. So this is the way that your worm bin works. Remember, on the bottom there are holes. Sitting on top of the bricks like this allows air to come up and in. And then the air holes on the side, the air holes on the top allow the bin to breathe, allow the worms access to oxygen. Okay? The holes on the bottom have another purpose. A lot of times the worm composting process creates a liquid called leachate, and if too much moisture builds up inside the bin, it will drain out the bottom onto the solid lid. Okay, so that's just one precaution. Now, if your bin is outside, you don't have to have it sitting on a lid. We've got ours in the garage. The solid lid on the bottom keeps any possible liquid from leaking out onto the floor. That leachate, that liquid, is pretty high in nutrients, so you can add that to water and water the garden with it. I would definitely make sure that I'm watering the soil and not spraying the leachate on the leaves of plants. So you're probably wondering why, if this is our worm bin, why we have a second tote that we're not using. I'm going to show you how that second tote works by looking at my old bin. So this second tote allows us the process of collecting the worm castings for using them in the garden. So I'm just going to move the new bin out of the way, and then we'll talk about the old bin. So here's my old bin. Taking the lid off. And with this bin, I had filled it with food scraps all the way up to this edge. And so it was pretty full. It was time for me to start a new bin and harvest the castings in this bin, okay? So 2 months ago, in order to harvest the castings, so what that means is that this bin was completely full of worms and their poop, essentially. They had filled it all up. And you can see that, you know, there's still bedding on top. I always made sure that there was bedding on top. But they had filled the bin. And, you know, just like any other animal, they're not super happy when they are just living in their own excrement. So it was time to give them a new home and harvest the worm castings. So what I did was 2 months ago, I stopped feeding them. It was up to here, and you can see in the last couple of months, they've brought the level in the bin down to here. That's because there was still a lot of food left in there, and what they were doing was they were going around the bin and eating all food scraps that they could find that were still in this bin. But, you know, they're hungry, they're ready for, you know, a steak dinner, they're ready for a good meal, and that's exactly the way you want them. So, to harvest the castings, I'm gonna take the second bin that we haven't been using. I'm going to take the bedding that is on the top layer of the old bin, and I'm going to put it in here. I'm going to transfer it. You can see that they ate most of the food I gave them, except they didn't get all the eggshells broken down. You can make sure that the eggshells are more easily decomposable for them, compostable for them by cracking them, like shredding the eggshells. But I just kind of throw it in there because it's not that important to me. If they don't get all the eggshells broken down, I'll just throw them into the next bin, or I can throw them in my compost bin out here in the yard. But if you want to give your worms a helping hand, they don't have hands, you can crumble up those eggshells and make them more easily degradable. Okay, so alright, so my second bin, I've put the bedding that was on top of this old bin soil, or old bin castings. Okay, I already checked it. It's a really nice level of moisture. It's perfect. feels like a wrung out sponge. If you were doing this, I would encourage you to just check the bedding. It's okay to touch. Just make sure that it feels like a wrung out sponge. If it's too dry, spray it a little bit with the water. Now, this is a very passive way of harvesting worm castings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bin with the bedding on bottom. I'm going to put it inside on top of the old bin so that the holes, remember this bin has holes on the bottom, makes contact with the worms and their castings. So now inside this bin is just worms and their castings. And they're hungry. And now they don't have any bedding. It's just them and their castings in there. They're ready for a good meal. So I've got them good and hungry. Got some nice bedding up here. What we want to do is add just a little bit of good food to the top bin. And that's going to encourage them to migrate up through those holes into the new bin. So I'm just going to add the same thing with the new bin we just built. I'm only going to put maybe a cup or two of food scraps in here. Well, that was kind of gross, and it all went plunk in there. I didn't mean to add that many, but there we go. That's okay. We've got about 2 cups of food scraps in there. Now, same thing with the new bin. I don't want to put too many food scraps in there until the worms have the idea and start migrating up. As they migrate up, I can begin to add more food scraps to this top bin. Now, this migration period is going to take a couple of months. So, let's say you're doing a lot of planting in May. It's a popular time around here. It would be, March would probably be a good time to start harvesting your castings, start this migration period. What we want is for the worms to migrate up to the top bin so that the bottom bin is just plain castings ready for the garden. Okay, so I saved some shredded paper to put on top of this secondary bin here because we want to make sure that food scraps are always covered. Gonna wet it down. The idea is that the worms down there will be attracted to this new environment where they've got clean bedding, they've got a really good meal waiting for them. I'm going to take the lid with the air holes on it, I'm going to put it on top of the secondary bin that's sitting in here, and in about 2 months time or so we should have a nice bin full of castings. Now, this is a very passive way of collecting your castings. You can do it manually, and by what I mean by that is I could just dump this bin of worm castings out onto like a tarp or something, and I could sift through it, putting worms back in the bin and putting castings in a bucket. I actually did that last year because I didn't plan ahead, and I really wanted to use the castings I had been creating, or the worms had been creating all year, and I didn't want to wait. I wanted to use the castings in my May plantings, and I just didn't plan ahead. So you can manually separate the worms from the castings, but it's very tedious. It takes a lot of time, and you know, frankly, that's not how I want to spend my time. I want to spend my time in the garden, planting. I hope you liked this demonstration of how to build a worm bin, and good luck with your worm bin. This is Amy at 10thacrefarm.com. Thanks for watching.